coming. Thank you so much for being here to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Coase-Sandor Institute. This is a terrific celebration, and the Institute is just so in keeping with the purpose of the University of Chicago. When the University of Chicago was founded a little bit more than 100 years ago, it was founded with a very specific purpose and commitment in mind, which was the advancement of knowledge and scholarly excellence. And in Chicago, we think about scholarly excellence as being about ideas that examine the most important phenomena, that explore deeply and ambitiously, that push the boundaries of knowledge, that change paradigms, and perhaps even establish new fields of thought. And at the law school, this innovative spirit has often meant scholarship that's interdisciplinary. From our founding, we had in our curriculum classes that exposed students and scholars that use the tools of history, philosophy, political science, and yes, economics. And this spirit has made the law school the birthplace of law and economics, and I think I can say confidently that we remain the global leader in law and economics. Now, I think it's been disputed as to pinpoint the exact moment when law and economics began. I've heard different accounts. I think maybe we can pinpoint it to when George Stigler, later winner of the Nobel Prize, co-taught an antitrust seminar with our then professor, subsequently dean and president and attorney general, Edward Levy. But law and economics has flourished over the years at the law school with incredible colleagues such as Richard Posner, Richard Epstein, Bill Landis, Frank Easterbrook, Douglas Baird, Saul Letmore, and so many others. And in 1991, law and economics at the law school reached an incredible milestone when Professor Ronald Coase received the Nobel Prize in economics. I believe he remains the only faculty member appointed in the law school to have won the Nobel Prize in economics. And in 2013, law and economics at the law school and at the university achieved another incredible milestone and launching pad, which was the foundation of the Coase-Sandor Institute for Law and Economics. Now, the Institute's purpose is to advance the scholarship of the faculty in law and economics, to facilitate the exchange of ideas in the field, and then to share those insights of Chicago law and economics with the world. It has been wonderfully impactful in reaching those goals. Richard and Ellen, I cannot thank you enough for your vision and your generous philanthropy that has made this tremendous impact possible. And it's so fitting that the Institute, which is founded on the idea of intellectual innovation, is encouraged and sponsored by Richard and Ellen, who in each of their respective fields are innovators. Ellen Sandor is an internationally acclaimed artist. Her work has been displayed in galleries around the world, including the Artists here in Chicago, the Museum of Contemporary Art, the Smithsonian, the National Academy of Sciences, U.S. embassies around the world. Ellen is the founder of the artist group Art to the End. Ellen and her colleagues created a new art form called scholograms, which are 3D barrier screen computer-generated photographs and sculptures. I think a little known fact about Ellen is that she's a co-holder of multiple patents, I believe 5. And she is also co-author of the 2022 book, New Media Futures, The Rise of Women in the Digital Arts. And Richard himself is also an innovator. I'll give you just 3 examples. When he was at the Chicago Board of Trade, he created the first interest rate futures contract. One of his creations, the Treasury Bond Futures Contract, became the most widely traded interest future in the world. The effect on markets was revolutionary, and he is often described as the father of derivative futures. Then he went on to develop the first spot and futures markets in emissions allowances for sulfur dioxide, and he designed and launched the first organized market for greenhouse gas reduction of emissions, the Chicago Climate Exchange. For this, he is often known as the father of climate trading. And then, my last example, in 2015, Richard established AFX, the American Financial Exchange. It is a self-regulated exchange that grew under his leadership to more than 240 bank and non-bank members. AFX launched a new benchmark interest rate known as Emeribor, which is a market-based benchmark. reflecting the actual costs of unsecured borrowing for more than 1,000 American banks and financial institutions. Were all this not enough, Richard is the co-author of multiple books, including Sustainable Investing in Environmental Markets, Electronic Trading and Blockchain, and one of my favorites, How I Sought, a great collection of essays. He is the recipient of many honors, and the law school is very fortunate to have him as the Aaron Director Lecturer in Law and Economics, where he regularly teaches for us the law and economics of natural resource markets. Ellen and Richard generously included the name of Ronald Coase in the name of the Institute, and Professor Coase exemplified the law school's commitment to path-breaking scholarship. His ideas continue to have enormous influence today. Just two of his articles, The Problem of Social Cost and The Theory of the Firm, each opened up entirely new ways of thinking and entirely new fields of scholarship. Now, in the decades since the establishment of the Coase-Sandor Institute, it has already fulfilled its promise of advancing scholarship in law and economics and sharing ideas with the world. And this is in large measure thanks to our faculty director, Omri Ben-Shahar. So, as many of you know, in my own scholarship, I have a quantitative bent, so of course I wanted to quantify this. We have 34 faculty members across the university, 27 here in the law school who are affiliated with the Institute. These are highly productive faculty members. They have produced 1,262 publications. This includes 111 books, 241 book sections, and 910 journal articles. The Working Paper Series of the Coase-Sandor Institute includes 912 different working papers that have been downloaded almost 800,000 times. The Coase-Sandor Institute has hosted, since its founding, 36 different conferences. Think about that. That means one almost every 3 months. Many of these conferences have been in partnership with other leading institutions, such as ETH Zurich, the University of Oxford, Tsinghua University, as well as the FTC and the Department of Justice. The Institute held 8 summer institutes that drew to our law school 533 participants from across the globe from 26 different countries. The Institute's also hosted 5 different lecture series, including the Coase-Sandor Global Lecture Series and 2 joint lecture series with the law school and FGB forums in law and economics in Brazil. And I'll also mention that our workshops at the law school, as I think all of you know, are legendary. Indeed, one of the great legends of our workshop is about Ronald Coase coming and presenting what became the problem of social cost in our workshop. And thanks to the Institute, the tradition of our workshop has continued with 130 different scholars presenting in our law and economics workshop since the establishment of the Institute. Now, the work of the Institute has enabled the production of incredible scholarship and its dissemination across the world. Again, Ellen and Richard, I'm so grateful for your vision and your generosity. It would not have been possible without you. And so this afternoon, I think it's best to experience a taste of the great scholarship our faculty colleagues are doing under the auspices of the Institute. And so without further delay, I welcome Professors Ha-Joon Kim and Anu Malani.
I thought I'd talk today, in true Chicago fashion, about a project I have exploring one oft-made argument against these markets. As many of you know, market-based regulatory instruments, cap and trade, pollution taxes, they're in theory much more efficient ways to achieve pollution reductions than more traditional command and control mandates. But Michael Sandel, Steve Kelman, and others have popularized this idea that these market-based instruments, because they allow entities to pay to pollute, thus commodify pollution, and thus reduce its moral stigma. Putting a price on pollution, in other words, they say, crowds out non-market norms of neighborliness and community feeling in favor of self-interest. Basically, every article and textbook that discusses market-based instruments will at least mention this anti-commodification critique, but it's never been squarely tested, and there's reason to think that it's wrong. So I set out to test this experimentally. I designed a survey experiment that asked participants to evaluate how morally bad it is to pollute a newly discovered pollutant, malzine, which I used ChatGPT to help me come up with that name. I randomly assigned participants to learn about a command and control mandate, a cap-and-trade program, or a pollution tax, or a no-regulation control, so it was a between subject design. And then I asked them how morally bad they thought polluting Malazine was. I predicted, because there might be some competing effects, that I'd get an overall null effect, no difference between conditions. And to be conservative, I made a series of experimental design choices designed to make participant opinions as elastic as possible, because I wanted to give the manipulation the greatest possibility of finding this reduction in moral stigma, finding the difference, uplifting the Sandel critique. So I created this new pollutant Malazine instead of testing climate change, because with climate change you might assume participant opinions are already fixed. People know how they feel about it. They might not know how they feel about Malazine. I also made Malazine a relatively light touch pollutant. The effects of Malazine are asthma and harm to plants. If it were something like cancer or death and something worse, then maybe all participants would just say, oh, it's bad, of course it's bad, and then again you find no difference between conditions, and so on. After review, the study design won a competition that meant North Next Door ran the demographically representative study for free, yay, surveying over 2,400 participants. So what did I find? As predicted, market-based instruments did not reduce the moral stigma of pollution. In fact, participants found Malazine slightly morally worse in the tax condition than in the mandate condition, and there was no significant difference between the cap and trade and the mandate conditions. And when I tested the more specific instance of a company emitting Malazine in compliance with the regulation, the company polluting in compliance with the mandate looked morally good, whereas the company emitting pollution in compliance with a market-based instrument with a tax or cap and trade system looked morally bad. So in other words, in some circumstances, a market-based instrument can increase the moral stigma of pollution. These findings were all in line with my pre-registered predictions. I want to end by thanking the Sandor family and Coase-Sandor. It is such an incredible privilege to have the support and guidance of Marie and others at the Coase-Sandor Institute, especially as a junior faculty member. Coase-Sandor has been an invaluable source to me of both financial and analytical support. I'm so grateful for folks like Morgan in helping me make sure that my methods in this project and my other work in ESG are truly watertight. And so I am just very lucky to be here and very lucky for the support of this institute. Thank you.
Like Kajan, I am very grateful to the Coase-Sandor Institute. It's been fantastic, and it's not as much just getting financial support. It's actually getting the support of the research community. And so I want to call out one person that's here, Morgan Miller, who's been critical for my research, but also two people that have now, I like to say, graduated. Jake Kramer and Bartek Woda have done amazing work supporting not just me, but many of the faculty here. So we are grateful. I want to talk about one or two of the time dependent. Permitting, one or two of the larger projects that I've done. So a lot of my work is in lower income countries, trying to understand the different policies that might impact economic development. And one of the nice things about the Coase-Sandor Institute is, even though it's ostensibly about law and economics, it has a broad definition of what this means. And so it's able to support projects such as the ones that I do. So the first project I want to talk about asks two questions, and they're questions that concern health insurance, in particular in lower income countries. First is, what is the benefit of health insurance in a lower income country? People often think that it's better just to provide healthcare services any way you can by building clinics. The question we ask is it a good idea to provide financial insurance that helps people pay for healthcare even in a private setting? And the second question is, what is the optimal price of this? Is it free, or should you charge them a premium, even if you're providing public health insurance? So we conducted a large-scale RCT, randomized controlled trial, of India's National Public Health Insurance Program. We randomized 50,000 people to access health insurance at different prices, including a control group that were not given special access. As far as we know, this is the second largest RCT of health insurance done in the world. It's also the longest RCT of health insurance ever done. We have 4 important findings that have informed policy since this, and so we work closely with the Indian government to kind of build on this to design health insurance, public health insurance in India. The first is that insurance definitely increases utilization, but it does not improve in any statistically significant way health. And the reason why that's important is because it tells us that health insurance can have value, but it's a financial value, not a health value. And that's how we should judge health insurance. Second, there's substantial demand for health insurance, but as one might expect, demand curves slope down, so charging a higher price reduces demand. The the slope is actually remarkably similar in India as it is in the United States. 1% change in premiums has very similar effect on percentage change in demand as it does in the United States. So that's a bit of a surprise, but even more surprising, even when you charge individuals full price for health insurance, 60% of the population take it up. Now this might not seem surprising in the United States, but in a lower income country where the expectation was basically charging any price would wipe out demand, this is a remarkably optimistic result. Third, there is adverse selection for health insurance in India. Now this might be a little bit also kind of boring for somebody sitting in a higher income country, but in lower income countries, the literature suggested that there was so little demand for health insurance that there wasn't even adverse selection for health insurance. Here we're finding there is not only demand, but meaningful adverse selection for health insurance, and so insurance design should take that into account. Fourth, we find that insurance may not actually improve, free insurance may not actually improve welfare in lower income countries. In fact, it's better to charge a premium for it, and that would improve welfare. And the optimal premium is about 500 to 1,000 rupees, which is the price that government pays for the insurance. And the reason for it is surprising. And it is that there's a very high cost of public funds in lower income countries because their tax systems are inefficient. So we have to think about the source of financing as well when we decide whether or not to do this project. So very briefly, I want to tell you about a second project. It's a little bit shorter. This is a project that is in a completely different sphere. It asks whether or not we should use democratic processes to decide what sorts of infrastructure projects to implement in lower income countries. And the reason for this is because the World Bank has been criticized for making decisions about infrastructure, whether it's bridges, roads, irrigation canals, in a top-down fashion without understanding local preferences. Critics want local input, even voting, to help decide where the money should be spent. So we did a large RCT of 700 villages where we ran them up, and it was an RCT to evaluate the impact of building irrigation canals. And we randomized villages to 3 different ways of deciding where those canals would be. One is we let a centralized planner decide after eliciting preferences. We were the central planner. But we're associated with the World Bank on this project. Number 2, we let local elites decide, so the local village mayor is called the sarpanch. And the third is we had anonymous voting by farmers in the village. The second thing we did is we randomized villages to either have the implementation done by a centralized firm that is part of the set of firms that are contracted with by the World Bank, or we gave the money to local villagers and let them do the implementation of the canals. And we found the following surprising results. The first one is voting yields the exact same outcome, location of channels and yield increases, the same as elite decision making, which is a surprise. It suggests that voters, even when voting is anonymous, tend to vote for what the elites want, even though privately they express separate preferences. They prefer something else. In fact, elite decision making that took into account local preferences actually yielded higher, better results on yields than either elite voting or either elite choice or voting. The second thing that we found that I think is very, very important to note is that said, decentralized implementation actually proved to be just as effective as centralized implementation. So that was a bit of a surprise. That's not something that is very high on the World Bank agenda. And so one of our co-authors who's at the World Bank is starting to make a bigger deal of this, which is we're getting the locus of focus on decentralization wrong. It shouldn't be about deciding what the projects ought to do, but rather how they're implemented. Okay, so that's enough. That gives you a sketch of the sorts of things. We hope that these policies are policy relevant, and again, would not have been possible without the Coase-Sandor Institute. So thank you very much, both of you.
Hi, Richard and Ellen. It's so nice to be here 10 years later. Somebody else should take this job and maybe revive some of that. But we had quite a decade with the support that you've given. And I want to mention one thing that you know about and you've been very much kind of part of initiating it, the vision of it, and that is the international program. So yeah, you know, Chicago is a city, but it's also, of course, a brand name and a dominant one in the market of academic ideas. When an idea is said to be Chicago school, what does one imagine? It imagines that it is novel, that it's provocative, smart, that it will challenge conventional thinking. And nowhere is this impression become more powerful and profound than in law. Here the term Chicago School refers not to this building, but to a movement that began, to a very influential approach known as law and economics, a movement that began in the conversations and dialogue between faculty in this university, as Dean Miles mentioned, and inspired by the work of Ronald Coase. It has since gone to become central and deeply influential in American law. Now, Chicago law and economics is also widely talked about in academic circles, in regulatory circles around the world, but until recently, somewhat superficially. People heard about it, but didn't quite know what to do with it. Not entirely also sure what it is, and a lot of misperceptions. When previous Dean Mike Schill asked me to help guide the Institute of Law and Economics, then it didn't yet have a name, I thought I saw an opportunity to build upon this kind of international curiosity and fame of our brand name and to export it. Let's introduce the methods of Chicago law and economics to the legal profession outside the US and help the legal elites, especially in developing countries, maybe even in Europe, adopt the tools of law and economics for the good. I recall a conversation with Richard in 2012, 1 year before Richard and Ellen's generous gift established the Institute, a conversation in which we kind of discussed exactly this issue. There are opportunities to take it global, and Richard passionately believed in it, and of all the things that we discussed at that time and what Chicago wanted to do, that was something that I kind of saw then a spark in your eye. And in fact, not only believed in it, but told soon after, Mike Schill said, Richard liked it, and he wants to help finance a pilot run of that thing. And so we established what became the first summer school in law and economics, where we opened it for registration, marketed it in around the world, invited faculty from many countries to come and enroll in a 2-week program where our faculty will give crash courses in law and economics. And there was an immense response. We at the time focused, these were better years in our relationship with China. So we focused mostly on faculty in China that come here. So in the decades since that, we have continued, once the Coase-Sandor Institute was established, we continued these international programs, and they were anchored with the network that was built by the scholars, faculty, and the researchers, law and social science faculty that have come here to attend these courses. Over 500 faculty, as Dean Miles mentioned, from all over the world. They met in the first 2 years, first year, maybe also in the second year, met Ronald Coase, and then they of course received the tools in those lectures, but they also heard inspiring lectures from distinguished Chicago icons like Martha Nussbaum, Richard Posner, and yes, Richard Sandor, in a big event every year. And they were given the practical tools to take back to their institutions and to hopefully to play a role both in legal education and in law reform in their countries. In collaboration with the Coase-Sandor Institute, these scholars, many of them have risen to prominent positions of deans, deputy deans, and leading reformers in government around the countries, have organized symposia on topics that of central interest in their legal system, invited the faculty that taught them the tools here in the summer school to participate. Many of the people of the faculty that are sitting here went to places like China, Japan, Hong Kong, Brazil, France, and many other places to talk about things like law and AI, food regulation, financial innovation, consumer contracts, and many other things. To give a flavor of that impact of Coase-Sandor, one of kind of the central things that the Institute did in the past decade with the support and resources that we had, we've asked 2 of our prominent graduates, people who were trained here with other doctoral degrees and have gone on to become professors in leading institutions in their countries, to join us. One of them is now in the US, but visiting in Virginia, the other is in Australia. Both have originally come here from China, and we will they will speak each for a few minutes to describe the impact of what the Chicago program has delivered for them. I think Ruin will go first, right? Professor Ruin Chen, we are so happy to see you and really have to come visit us in person more often. Ruin Chen got her doctoral degree from University of Chicago and taught at Peking University, has risen to a very senior status there, and most recently has moved to teach in Australian National University, and that's where she's talking to us now. So in a very inconvenient time for her. Thank you for joining us.
Really thrilled to be part of this celebration, especially for the generosity and tolerance of everyone for me to be participating via Zoom instead of be there. And I know I look a bit silly against this background, but it is very, very special to myself and to my family. It is actually a visualization of neutrino done by Alan Sandor at the exhibition in Fermilab back in 2017. It's after a dinner for our 6th Summer Institute where Alan mentioned this exhibition to me. And then later I brought my family there to Fermilab. And we took a photo. And then my daughter, a few weeks ago, shared this photo with her classmates in a PE class, not a physics class, because she really wants to be able to run as fast and frictionless as the neutrino. We are incredibly grateful to the insights and also support that I think Ellen and Richard have been rendering to us, allowing us to unveiling and visualizing the invisible in the world, in the market, in the relationship between the market and regulation in particular. So I'm here really to express our gratitude as alumni of the multiple summer institutes, the junior forums, and the law and economics program in the University of Chicago. And also today, something that I want to say is that even though we had all these discussions in the classroom, in the seminars, and also more spontaneous conversations outside of the campus and outside of the United States, all over the world, that something unintended actually happened. There has emerged a new market, what I call the idea market or intellectual market, particularly about law and regulation and the market. And so it's all about where should regulation come from, whether we should have regulation, whether the absence of regulation is a problem, and what we should have. And this market has grown so prominently, I believe, that I'll just give you 2 examples. One example is within the legal profession. There has been a separate division of study of regulation within the overall umbrella of law, both inside and outside of China. In the very prominent China Law Society, a bunch of people actually set up a separate division wholly devoted to the study and research, to the study and education of regulation. And can you guess who were the original founders? Many of the Summer Institute's alumni, especially from the 1st and the 2nd year. And another example that I want to give is that this emerged intellectual market or market of ideas on regulation and market has really pushed forward the level of interdisciplinary studies also in the developing world. In particular, I think in the past, lawyers tend to be sidelined, tend to be the implementation of plans that people come up with, either the policymakers or the market or the legislators. However, because of these interdisciplinary discourse, the research that has generated or grow out of these support, that actually lawyers nowadays can actually contribute to be able to talk with others at the higher level, at an early stage. Therefore, we can really really identify the unseen problems coming forward, and also to be able to identify the solutions that we're otherwise blind to. So this intellectual market, I believe, is particularly critical for educating our younger generations. So I think my generation, probably everyone here agrees that we derived enormous benefits from the growth of the market in both the developing world and the developed world. However, our students and my children's generation sometimes don't necessarily feel so. They feel that many problems are actually created by the market. So they blame the market for many issues or many threats that we saw coming to our society. And they naturally turn to government for solutions. They want more regulation, they want heavier regulation, and they want regulation to a level that is really unprecedented. So I think it is at this critical moment that we share our thoughts about the relationship, the proper relationship between market and regulation. It is at this moment we need ever more vigorous debate and discussions about whether we should have regulation, what type of regulation we should, and how government regulator versus other type of regulator should be situated here. And I feel, again, very, very grateful that Richard Allen really enabled us to carry on this very, very critical discussion for our future generation. Again, I'll give a few examples. So Richard probably remembered that about the book tour that he had back in 2012 in Beijing. And he gave a public talk in the new Chicago Beijing Center about his new book, Good Derivatives. What Alan and Richard probably didn't know, what's happened afterwards is that this book has become a Bible for research institutions, for policymakers, even for judges. Every time when people want to argue against the bias against the market. So we show to people that you can create a good market that serves social goods, that serve the environment, serve the benefits of human beings. Another example I'll give you, this is also very interesting. Even after I moved to Australia, I realized that when we teach about environmental regulation, when we teach about regulation in general, actually the default regulatory tool that we teach has completely flipped. In the past, Cass Sunstein had to persuade us that market-based incentive-based tools are good, probably more superior than command and control. But nowadays, we had to actually alert our students of the critical value of command and control to the building of markets such as the emission trading market and this climate change market. And this is all thanks to the great idea and also solid work by people like Richard, who created this enormously successful trading markets in the real world that we had to flip our understanding and the way that we teach our students. And finally, law, finance and environment. So we are all very fully aware of the climate change, all the risks that imposed to human beings and the AI technology. And again, our future generation tend to try to look for protection from the government. But I think Richard's ideas and work and Alan's visualization of the invisible has taught us a great lesson that we should be able to find a solution in these connections that we otherwise are blind to, such as finance and environment. And we have seen that those ideas have been put into action. Today is actually the 20th anniversary of my personal journey and also my classmates' journey of law and economics. which started right in this building. So I can't think of a better occasion to celebrate it. And Mr. Coase gave Chinese the very valuable advice that China needed a market for ideas, intellectual market. But I believe that Richard and Ellen really put this idea into action, even though it's probably unintended. And I do wish that our future generation, our students, our children, and even our grandchildren can benefit from this idea market and then to grow this market in the future. And I hope Ellen and Richard would still be supporting us with this compassion and with strong support. Thank you very much.
Juan Lu, no, we call him John. John, are you there? Yes.
Yeah.
John also received his doctoral degree here at the University of Chicago, was also a member of the first, educated by the first summer school in law and economics, gone on to be a very prominent leading empirical law and economics scholar in Hong Kong University, and I should also say a very brave one in terms of the kind of scholarship that he is reporting and publishing. Please, John.
So I'd like to share some observation from my perspective as first a very young graduate student and then a young scholar working in China. So I've already seen the tremendous impact of the Institute and U Chicago Law School on training, I would say more than one generations of young scholars and young students in China. So when the summer program was first introduced, it became very popular in China. So many faculty and professors applied for the program to learn law and economics in its birthplace. And most importantly, they can have a chance to talk to and communicate with the faculty here in U Chicago. So the summer programs could have admit only established legal scholars, but there were actually a few slots reserved for young scholars and young graduate students. In retrospect, I think the idea is to expose them to law and economics at a very early stage. So I was fortunate enough to join the first summer program as a grad student. And of course, the summer program actually changed my academic life. So I think the practice of including young scholars and young students in the summer program, and also the junior faculty workshop and some related program has proven to be immensely successful. So after these years, we now have several thousand young graduate students, young scholars trained here in Chicago in the summer program in the junior faculty workshop, who have later become young scholars, professors across the country, across China. So I'm an empiricist, so I like to collect data and quantify things, just like D. Miles. So I took a look at the websites of the top law schools in China. So I think in the top 5 law schools, we have junior faculty who attended the summer summer program of the Institute in Chicago in every one of them. So in the top 10, we have junior faculty and professors in 8 of them. So which means that our alumni of the Summer Institute and the other programs like the junior faculty workshop have spread across the country, across China. So these young scholars trained at Chicago have brought about a wave of innovation in legal research in China. So they have pioneered new research areas which were previously non-existent in the country. So, for example, they started the area of economic analysis of data privacy and data regulation. They've started the area of economic analysis of informal institutions that support China's economic growth, including informal property rights and informal finance. So, and they've also started using massive judicial decision data to study Chinese law and Chinese judiciary. So, but I think more importantly, these junior scholars, the scholars who were grad students who participate in the summer program and later become young scholars in China, they are very popular among their students, partially because their methodological approaches, and of course also because their research are more interesting using law economics. So they attract a lot of students to their classes. And I think the impact of the institute and the impact of UChicago has been carried to many, many more young students in China by their teaching of law economics in China. So I spoke with several young scholars in China. So one of them teaches Intro to Legal Theory, Introduction to Legal Theory at Peking University. So he has about 150 students in his class every year. And the class, half of the class time is about law economics. So another professor teaching empirical legal studies, he has about 1 student in each class. So I have 100 students in my AI and law class and another 100 students in my law and development in China class. So and I have 100 students because the cap is 100. Otherwise, I will have more students. So think about this magnitude of education and training. So we have scholars, especially young scholars, we train spread out across the country, and they are teaching thousands of students per year. And after these years, you can imagine the scale of young students in China that have been influenced by the idea of economic analysis or law. So I think it's pretty fair to say that the Institute and UChicago Law School has trained, educated, and influenced more than one generation of young scholars and students in China. And of course, the future is theirs. They are the hope of the country, and they will continue to change the country using the ideas they learn in the future. So we are very grateful for the support and opportunities provided by the Institute and by UChicago Law School. And thank you so much.
Last thing we wanted to share with Richard and Ellen and with the group that's here is very briefly some of the work that's currently doing by our students, our JD students in law and economics. And two of our students are here, George and Anna, who will each talk about the work they're pursuing, the JD and PhD in economics in Chicago. And Anna Vasily, please go first.
Hi everyone, thanks for having me, and thank you so much to the Institute. I feel like us really young researchers, we're like a high-risk stock, so very few people are willing to invest in us and give us money to go present at a conference because there's a high likelihood that our research is just like going to be bad. But sometimes it's good, and I hope mine is good, and I'll tell you something about a project that I presented in January, given the funding that I got to go and share it and hear thoughts on it and so on and so forth. And it's also about the marginal value of resources to people who need it most. So during my undergraduate studies, which was some time ago, not that long ago, I worked with an econ professor as a summer research associate, and this sparked my first interest for research. And we looked at these new data sets that look at households and basically look at individuals' health, consumption, expenditure, saving, and so on and so forth. And we tried to evaluate all these claims saying that when people get a health shock and they get disability insurance from the state or other forms of assistance, that actually there are a lot of false claimants, that it's just an avenue for people who don't want to work to claim that they have chronic back pain and just get kind of funding from the government and keep going forward. And basically we looked at these data sets that had nurses going to people's homes and assessing their health and looking at what benefits they get, and what we found was completely the opposite, that basically there are people who claim that they are sick when they're not to get some benefits, but overwhelmingly there are people who are sick and get sometimes transitory health shocks. Maybe they have breast cancer and are in remission and it's hard for them to do work, but overwhelmingly there are people who can't perform their daily lives as they would otherwise, and they sometimes lose their job or can't work full time, and they don't get any benefits from the government. And this was kind of a depressing finding that we found, but what made it worse is that we thought to ourselves, But when people are disabled or when they have difficulty performing daily tasks, they actually need more money to achieve similar outcomes as their healthy counterparts. So basically the poverty rates that we're seeing disproportionately among these people are actually understated because these people actually need more money. And this is something that we wrote, but I didn't really know how to evaluate that claim. And in the meantime, I got to Chicago, started thinking about microeconomic theory, and got even more resources to think about this in a very structured way. So my paper is about estimating precisely that. What is the marginal value of a dollar to a particular individual with particular abilities and particular traits? So how to think about when someone gets a health shock, they need more money. So what could it be in terms of economic theory? One avenue is a preference shift. So maybe when I'm healthy, I like buying tennis rackets or walking in the park, which is for free, and that brings me joy. But when I'm disabled, I prefer to spend more on assistance and technological devices and things that are more expensive for me that I just prefer in these times. Another thing is a relative cost. I experienced that myself last quarter. I had strep throat twice for 2 weeks. I had to miss school, and I couldn't cook for myself, and I had to get DoorDash every day. And the cost of living for me rose tremendously. And this was literally like something akin to a common cold. So I can only imagine what it is for people who have more serious issues. So one can think about it as a relative price of having a clean home or being transported from point A to point B. Just at this price increasing. We don't see it in the data, but the price is relatively higher for these people. And the third possibility is kind of what we call a scale shift in utility. I buy goods, and before buying something gave me X amount of joy, but now, because I've kind of lost joy, I can't do all these things that I could, buying things kind of replaces only half of the value that it did before. Anyways, what I did with my research project, which has a lot of data and a lot of empirics, is I basically took one of these like new data sets that has a lot of information, so many that you don't even know what to do with it, and tried to kind of use this econ theory to translate the data into kind of evaluating what happens with these people's utility functions and costs and preferences. And what I found overwhelmingly is that the marginal value of an additional dollar comparing a healthy person with same income and an unhealthy person with the same income, it goes up by a lot. And all three factors contribute to it. And so now that I've found this, what can we do about it? Market-based solutions are very good in this scenario. They are maybe for transitory health shocks because I can sort of maybe insure myself against them, buy some sort of insurance that gives me money in unhealthy states because that's what I want. But what about people who are born unhealthy? They can't really insure against it before they're born. Maybe their parents can, but that might be imperfect because the child's utility isn't perfectly, and the parent's utility, maybe a parent is credit constrained, so on and so forth. So most of the times for these issues, governments are the ones that provide insurance. So one option is to just ramp up the disability insurance programs that we have, but again, that's kind of politically unpalatable because a lot of people do think that it's just kind of an avenue for poor people to get cash and pretend that they're sick. But another reason is that it does induce some false claimants. So something that I've been working on recently and what I got feedback at the conference and I'm still working on is kind of figuring out a welfare improving commodity tax policy. Because as a byproduct of estimating these utility functions and what people like more and what people like less, I actually found that when people become disabled, I know exactly which are the goods that they prefer more. And not just in terms of like maybe perhaps a wheelchair, but actually, for example, they prefer electricity. They prefer as if they really, really like electricity. And this is because they need more assistive devices, more technology, and things like that. So one could create a commodity tax menu where in one menu, things that are preferred by the disabled are subsidized, and things that are not preferred by them are relatively taxed. And another menu which relatively taxes things that are preferred by the unhealthy, that is preferred by the unhealthy, but is not preferred by the healthy. So basically, the healthy and the unhealthy might have an incentive to self-select into these two groups, and you could use goods that are non-transferable, like utility, like transportation, and things like that to achieve this. I'm currently working on that, but yes, I was really happy to share that at the conference and get more feedback, and I'm very grateful for your investment in my very risky potential.
All right,
sad no one's used this mic. I would have felt like a rock star behind it, but exactly. So I would just like to extend another thank you to you guys. It's been unbelievable. Your generosity has both allowed me the honor to go to Washington, D.C. and present, but it's also helped in the Law and Econ Society give our lunch talks this year. So I run that with Grant, with Benedict, and also I just wanted people to kind of saying thank you to people. Nina Gray has been really awesome and really helpful throughout this whole thing. She helps us, get these events off the ground. So, we couldn't do half of what we do without your support, and so thank you. So my research focuses on an under-researched portion of the litigation process that is often determinative of outcomes. Specifically, my research asks, how do people find their attorneys, and how does this process impact litigation outcomes down the line? While it is well known that your lawyer makes all the difference in a case, that's why people come here, the key insight from my research is that lawyers care a lot about who they represent, especially when these lawyers care about winning. As a result, not only do clients choose their attorneys, but attorneys in some ways choose their clients. And to understand why this is an issue, let's think about the problem from the lawyer's perspective. Imagine there are two identical clients. One's from a privileged group and one's from an underprivileged group. Everything about these clients besides that is the same. They're the same age, they're the same gender, they're injured in the same way. In fact, let's assume they were on the same bus before this. If the lawyers themselves wasn't discriminatory, you might imagine that they'd be equally willing to represent both of these clients. So each client should have an equal chance of being represented by them, right? Well, not so fast. You see, remember that not only do clients choose their lawyers, but lawyers also choose their clients. A rational lawyer will look at these cases and understand that the underprivileged client is less likely to win their case, and even if they do, they're likely to get lower damages. This is a problem for the lawyer because they're often paid on contingency fees. As a result, lawyers will prefer to represent those from the privileged group, not because they themselves are prejudiced, but due to the biases that pre-exist in the legal system. The result of this dynamic is that lawyers in the market exacerbate, or they make worse, the biases that already pervade the legal system. This is because all the good lawyers will want to represent people in the privileged groups, while all the bad lawyers will want to represent the worse off groups, who may be left without representation at all. Taking a step back further, what does this mean? This means that every time we see disparate outcomes in the litigation system where attorneys are incentivized to win, either through contingency fees or some other mechanism, the outcome gap can be decomposed into a legal system bias and a separate additional lawyer effect. Better understanding this decomposition can help us target policies to narrow the outcome gap. I think I'll leave it there, but thank you both again for the opportunity. Both at ALS and today, both of these experiences are valuable to people like Anna.
So thank you, Anna and George. And I hope that today from the program we get a sense of the incredible scholarship that's supported here at the law school through the institute, also through the projection of ideas into the world, through the institute, and through building up the next generation of great scholars for the future of law and economics. Now, we wanted to thank Ellen and Richard, and we thought about how we could give them a token to express our appreciation for everything that they have made possible. Now, for this, I drew on the expertise of Omri and Erica, because my suggestion was, let me just get a piece of law school swag, and that's what we did. But they pointed out to me that actually Richard has a very imaginative and creative and informative piece of swag that he gives every year to the students in his seminar. It is this t-shirt, which shows the incredible impact of carbon trading market, of SO2 markets on developing and making our air cleaner. And so we drew inspiration from this. We drew inspiration from Ellen's own career as an artist. And we wanted to give you something that drew on these colors and that also is a piece of art for you. And so it is, if we can bring it out. Please. You can open it. You can, please open it.
I can't do this nicely.
No.
Oh, it's beautiful. Wow. Okay, everyone, hold on.
Yeah. So it is symbols for this is that it is a Chinese elm, and it includes the colors in the T-shirt that you give every year, and the representation of the impact of emissions markets on improving our environment. And we also have, for everybody here today, also a lapel pin, also showing the impact of this symbol, and its impact of the Institute internationally, and the impact and power of markets. Thank you. Thank you. So Richard would like to say a few words to wrap up your program.
Yeah, just one or two words. I said to Ellen while we were listening that Ronald Coase would be absolutely thrilled that the students, the faculty, the research you were doing, and I know that it really matches every expectation he had about a free market for ideas. And this was his dream, and that was my dream with them. So Ellen and I really appreciate everything that you faculty has done and everything that the students have done. My watch is ringing. It's great to watch it. All we wanted to do is to provide resources to students and faculty so they could choose whatever they wanted to do to advance knowledge. And that was the dream. It's your call, you do it, enrich humanity, and we'll be sitting on the sidelines clapping. Thank you very much.